Speaker. Mr. Speaker, throughout our lives here on earth, God places in our path certain people who in our lives help shape who we are and ultimately help us to understand our purpose. A couple of years ago, I met someone whose optimism, faith, and valor in the face of difficulty has had a great influence on me, my family, and our entire community. I met Mr. David Hyde in 2013, who at that time was a small business owner in Cartersville, Georgia. And at that time, I was a relatively unknown candidate for Congress who was promoting the idea that America's days are still ahead of us if we define where we're going and aggressively set a course to get there. David quickly became a supporter and friend. Although many had lost hope in restoring America's greatness, David was a breath of fresh air. His patriotism was inspiring, his optimism was infectious, and his energy invigorated me with a willingness to fight on. David and I share a vision to restore our struggling nation to one that is free, safe, and full of opportunity. We both believe that we can turn the tide and give our grandchildren a nation better than the one we inherited. But of course, it will take a lot of hard work. Within 2 weeks of our introduction, David was given the news that he had esophageal cancer, and it was rapidly spreading. Now, after nearly 2 years of quite literally putting up the fight of his life, the cancer is quickly taking David's life. The time my friend has left with his wife and children is no longer measured in months or weeks, but in days. Realizing that any day could be David's last, I recently asked David, if you had the ability to speak to the American people, what would you say? Mr. Speaker, in response to that question, David sent me the following words of encouragement to give to the people of this great nation. David wrote, I recently had the honor of going to lunch with a friend just days before he shipped off to join the Navy. As we sat enjoying our meal, I saw in the eyes of my friend a young man who was proud to be given the opportunity to serve his country. The more we talked, the more he reminded me of another young man who, 35 years earlier, had also left home and family to join the Navy. The similarities between the two of us were not lost on me, and it reminded me of all that America held for a young man like me back then. While my vision of sailing the high seas and protecting the land of the free may have been somewhat jaded by old black and white movies I grew up watching, the dream of doing something that really mattered was alive and real to me. While America may have gotten off course, the goal of why we served has never changed. We have lost many of the freedoms we once held, but I believe we are not so far gone from those days that with hard work, sacrifice, and turning our eyes back to God, they cannot be restored. My life is a living example of God's restoration powers. It doesn't appear God will heal my sick body, but I know that in the land I am soon going to enter, I have already been granted a new body, a perfect one, which I will have for eternity. That, my friends, is restoration. Just as He will restore me, I believe He can restore our nation to the greatness it once saw. But it will only be possible if we turn our affections back to Him. The road to restoration is not easy, as I can personally attest. It is hard, painful, and discomforting, but when your eyes are upon God, not your problems, the path is much easier to endure. He has set out a clear plan with guidelines that aren't hard to follow. As our founders understood, we may have some battles to overcome and a wilderness to cross, but we must not be paralyzed by fear of the unknown, for it is in God we trust. When leading the Israelites from bondage, Moses had to lift his rod over the Red Sea, in complete trust before God parted the waters for safe passage. He trusted God and forged on. Although he faced insurmountable odds, the fear of the unknown didn't stop Joshua from forging on. During the darkest hours of the American Revolution at Valley Forge, Washington didn't give up, but dug in and put his faith in the providence of God. Leaders who are willing to do what is difficult, or even what seems to be impossible, are the ones who carry the team forward. We must honor God and know that His plans for us include only one thing, His glory. If we're in it for Him, we win. If we're in it for ourselves, we lose. Just as my young friend went out to serve in the U.S. Navy without a clearly defined path or step-by-step guidelines, but fully relying on his authorities to lead him, we must know that if we are to return to our country's traditional values, we need to study our history, find men and women willing to adhere to those founding principles, and tighten ourselves for a brighter future led by our intelligently chosen authorities. Who is your leader? My best advice as a man looking backwards with 20/20 vision is to decide now whom you will serve and proceed in a manner worthy of your calling. David C. Hyde, Jr. Thank you, David, for these words of inspiration and hope. God bless you, my friend, as you forge ahead in faith and trust in God Almighty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.